Talk about a conversational superpower. Something that immediately elevates you in the eyes of everyone that you're around, everyone that you will ever meet, and that, in general, just makes life much more enjoyable. The skill that I'm talking about is storytelling. As humans, we're hardwired to love a good story. We loved stories as a kid, and we still do now as an adult. Billion-dollar industries are all centered around stories. But most people have shit storytelling chops. A lot of people still tell stories like a child tells stories. Have you ever heard a child tell a story? It's like, this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And that's the child's version of a story. I got to school today, and the teacher was there as well, and then Mickey came, and he had a new bike. That's a story. But that's not the story. That's just a sequence of events. That's like saying The Lord of the Rings is about some little dudes and they find this ring, but it's a bad ring. Like an old guy says it's a bad ring. So they go to a volcano and they throw it in. And then the eagles come and they're fine. They're saved. But that's not a story. I mean, I don't think people would come see that in theaters. That's not motivating. That's not uplifting. That's like saying Batman is about a rich kid that sees his parents get murdered and then he decides to become a ninja and dress like a bat and then beat people up at night. Well, technically it's not wrong. That's sort of what it's about, but there's so much more. If you strip the skills of telling a good story from the events itself, then you end up with this weird husk where there's a lot of potential, but you never get it out. Because you're shit at storytelling. So let's go over some of the elements that go into a good story. Because if you understand this, every experience you have, no matter how mundane, can be turned into a story. I have stories about almost dying in the Nevada desert. Those are high stakes, right? Almost dying, that's interesting. But I can just as well tell you a story about how I went to a new restaurant and make it super interesting. Make it something that you would love to hear. That if I stop in the middle, you would ask me like, how does it, what's next? What's the rest? Tell me. It's not necessarily about the stakes. It's about how you say it, how you tell it, how you structure the story. So let's get into some storytelling principles. Number one is structure. A story, very simple, has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end. Every story is like this. It doesn't matter if you read a 10,000 page novel, it will have a beginning, it will have a middle portion, and then it will have an end. It's a 3-act structure. And usually what we see is that the first act is a setup, and then there's a conflict, and there's a climax. So let's start with the setup. If you're going to tell a story, you want to make it so that you open with a bang. You immediately grab the attention of your listener. If I say to you, have I ever told you about that time when I almost died in the Nevada desert? That's a good setup. That's a good hook. Probably someone wants to know, did I tell you about the time that I met Sean Connery in a Las Vegas casino? Now we're sort of luring them in, reeling them in, giving them something that's at least mildly interesting, preferably very interesting. But setup is about more than that. If we're setting up a story, I want to give you some background. I want to give you broad strokes of what we're going to deal with. So I'm going to tell you roughly who's in the story, where it's taking place, when it's taking place. I'm giving you a picture. I'm painting a rough picture. And somewhere in the book, Elements of Style, the author says, writing is about throwing the reader a lifeline so he can pull himself into the story, right? You don't want to throw like the lifeline plus the anchor plus the chain. So you don't want to go overboard on the details. Got to stay interesting. I can't say, hey, let me tell you about that time that I went to a new restaurant and it was September 22 and the weather outside was sort of rainy and the skies were gray. But before that, like in the morning it was really sunny. And then for whatever weird reason, because, it was in the Netherlands. Did I tell you it was in the Netherlands? In fact, it was in Rotterdam. And I was there, and like in the morning, see how that you sort of go off track. It's uninteresting. Like, you're telling me all this BS that doesn't pertain to the story at all. I mean, I can say I went to this restaurant, weather was shitty, so we had to sit inside. That's enough. That's fine. You sort of painted the picture. You still have to tell me more. Like, you have to tell me who was there, what kind of restaurant, who did I bring with me, why do I go there, why is the restaurant even interesting. Those are things that you should get handled in the setup. Watch any movie ever, if it's any good, and you'll see the first part is always setting up the stage, telling you what's going to be in this, who is going to be in this, and why is it interesting, why should I care. For example, if you watch the start of Indiana Jones, the first Indiana Jones movie, if I remember correctly, it starts out with an action scene where Indy is in the temple trying to get a statue and things go wrong. Like, there's a whole, you get lured in by the action, right? And then we switch back to seeing Indiana Jones as a university professor, I believe in archaeology, teaching class. And now we get a sense of who this guy is. Like, his day job is apparently that. He's a boring professor. And just a few minutes ago, we saw him with the whip. We saw him, survive life-threatening situations. It's a beautiful contrast, but it sets up the story very, very well. Now the next part, the middle part, is usually about conflict. We've set up the story. I told you roughly what was going on. And now we get to the point where I want to tell you the central conflict going on, the problem. Because a story is about an issue, a challenge, something to overcome. Doesn't matter if it's a funny story, if it's a tragic story. The mood of the story doesn't matter. What we want to know is, okay, you have the situation, now introduce a problem. What's going on? So if I stay with Indiana Jones for a second, I remember it's been many years since I saw the movie, so I might be off. But I won't be much off, because story beats are sort of similar across movies. But he's established as a character, and then someone comes into the classroom and presents him with something intriguing. Could be a mystery, could be an artifact, could be a mission, could be a challenge, could be a problem. Doesn't really matter. It's something that moves the story forward. So if I told you the story about me almost dying in the Nevada desert, I would start with the setup, like me going to the car rental place in the morning. It's in Las Vegas. It's hot in the morning, and it's early, and I'm renting a beautiful American muscle car, a Dodge Viper, fire engine red, just a magnificent vehicle. This is a hard-top car, right? So the guy at the rental place asks me, hey, do you want the top on? Or do you want it off? I'm like, obviously off. It's hot as balls out there. Take it off. Takes it off. I speed off. It has rear-wheel drive, so when I drive off the lot, I almost get killed immediately because I miscalculate how quickly it starts swerving on the road. And actually what we're doing, my colleague told me we're going to drive to the Grand Canyon. Now what I just given you of the story, that's the setup. I've told you I'm in it, where we're going, what vehicle I have, and I've told you a very crucial part, which is going to be important later, which is me saying, of course, take the top off. It's hot. So now we get to the next part of the story, which is the conflict. So my colleague told me it's a 2-hour drive. Turns out it's a 6-hour drive. This is 15 years ago. The internet wasn't what it is now, and I hadn't bothered to check. I assumed that he knew the difference between 2 hours and 6 hours. So we're driving there, and it's a stick shift car, by the way. And my colleague doesn't drive stick shift. He only drives automatic. He can't drive stick. It's weird. Who knows? So we're driving there. 6-hour drive. We're in the Grand Canyon. It's magnificent. It's beautiful. We get a bite to eat. And by the time we're done, it's starting to get dark. And there are all these signs along the road saying danger, ice forming, and all day it's been hot, like desert hot. And it's starting to cool down a bit. But I still see the signs and I think it's funny. Like, ice forming. So we start driving back. And at this point, I've been driving for, I don't know, 9 hours, right? So I'm starting to get a little bit tired. And the temperature's coming down like fast. It is getting cold. Slowly, I'm starting to get like why all the signs of ice forming, etc. are along the road. Because it is getting cold. And I turn up the heat, find out that half of the heating system doesn't work. So the thing that blows in your face, that works just fine. So my face is red hot. But every other vent doesn't work. So my feet and my legs are starting to get ice cold because I'm wearing a t-shirt, right? I'm in desert gear. So my face is red hot. Legs are ice cold. I'm getting tired. And it's getting dark. And we still have to go back. And at this point, I find out that the navigation thing that we have on it also malfunctions. So now I still have about 4 hours to go in a place I've never been before, middle of the desert. And to top it all off, the gas light comes on. So I'm almost out of gas. And I have no idea where to find a gas station. So now I've established conflict. There's an issue. Like, you start with the man, then you put him in the jungle. That's the way storytelling works. There's an issue. The stakes are getting to a crescendo. We have to sort of get to the end now, right? So the next step is a climax. The story needs to end somewhere. And if you do 1 and 2 right, but you mess up number 3, your story is dead in the water. Like, people love a good climax. So when we get to the climax, we want to make sure that it wraps up the story in the best possible way. So all of the stuff that we set up before needs to wrap up in a nice, beautiful little package. And preferably, if at all possible, it needs to have some sort of a lesson or a transformation for the protagonist. It needs to have a payoff. Because if you have a decent story, like if you have a decent opener, decent middle, and then you mess it up at the end, it tarnishes the whole story. It takes away all the power. Don't want to do that. Want to make sure that it wraps everything up nice and tight. We want to see a payoff, a lesson, a changed person at the end of the story. And now that you have the story right, you have sort of the structure put together. Just this thing, just making sure that there's a beginning, middle, end. Everything flows into one another. Just that fact will dramatically increase the quality of your storytelling. Now you can put the next layer on top of it, which is the actual telling of the story. The words you use, your cadence, your tone. You need to add some drama into it. You need to make it exciting to listen to. Now, some people are naturally good at this, and some people have to learn it. But in general, what you want to do, if it's in writing, you want to use powerful words that mean something. So you want to get the easiest, you want to get the most simple verbiage to get your point across and not overcomplicated. But you want to use words that pack a punch. And in terms of like written storytelling, I'll be going into that in a separate private video for HU members. So that's not going to be on YouTube. That's going to be private only, showing you how to do that. But if we're telling stories, you can use body movement, you can use hand motions. So let me give you an example. I did an MMA fight. I won't recount the whole story, but we get to the part where I get in the ring. And we start feeling each other out. And at a certain point, I managed to hit a jab. And when I tell the story, so I hit the jab. I make the movement, right? And at the moment that I hit him, and it's not hard, right? It's like a little tap. The moment that I hit him, I realize, hey, wait. This guy is slightly taller than I am. So if I can hit him, then he can probably hit me. And at that moment, like instinctually, my face moves back and I see a fist flying by my face. He's throwing the punch so hard that I can feel the air movement on my face, like whoosh, so quickly. And at that point I realized, oh shit, this guy's really trying to knock me out for real. Like he's not playing.